Uh, but like this is an international recognized resolution. Now, by withdrawing from this kind of resolution, what will be the consequences that Sri Lanka could face?
Well, that depends on how Sri Lanka fulfills the commitments that have been made in terms of that resolution. The Sri Lanka government in 2015 signed up to certain things. They said, we will do this and that, we will follow this process, we will follow this roadmap. They have signed that. Now a subsequent government comes and withdraws its signature or withdraws its co-sponsoring. But the resolution still remains. Because Sri Lanka withdraws its co-sponsorship, it does not mean the resolution has gone away. The resolution still remains because the rest of the UN Human Rights Commission of about 35 or 40 countries has approved it. So the resolution remains, and Sri Lanka has said in 2015 that they will implement and go according to the process set out in that. So Sri Lanka would still be required to show its progress. I believe that this is what I have heard, that on this occasion, this is only a time for reporting back the progress made. It is not really a time for, it's not the time for a final accounting. Sri Lanka was given 2 years in I think 2017 or 18, given 2 additional years, which comes up next March. So this March, Sri Lanka doesn't have to give its full record. I mean, doesn't have to show it implemented everything, because it was given 2 years to do that. This year they can say we have done so much, but it's unlikely that the international community will critique them because they have still another year to implement. It will be next year that Sri Lanka will have to make a case and say we implemented this much, or we didn't implement, or we didn't care to implement. At which point the international community, or rather the UN Human Rights Council, will have to take, then at that point they have to take a decision as to what to do. But at this meeting itself, I think what's going to happen is Sri Lanka will withdraw its co-sponsorship, and maybe the other countries in the Human Rights Council will express their regrets or whatever. They will say they are sorry that such a thing is happening. Maybe they'll say that. But there won't be an accounting. Sri Lanka doesn't have to answer because it has 2 years more, and this is only the first year.
Doctor, now, the couple of weeks ago, Army Commander Shavendra Silva was banned by US to enter into its territory. So, do you expect, if Sri Lanka failed to fulfill its commitment, these sort of severe consequences Sri Lanka will face in the future?
That we cannot say. It is possible that there can be a further escalation of or expansion of these travel bans. But now what has actually happened, that would be a decision of each country. I don't think the Human Rights Council itself collectively will take such a decision. They will not take a decision to punish Sri Lanka. I don't think they will, or to specify punishments. But they will probably judge whether Sri Lanka has achieved its targets or not, or achieved the targets it promised or not. That they will set out. But I think it probably will be individual countries that take the decision as to what they will do regarding that. And some countries might decide to take more severe action. On the other hand, next year maybe the situation has changed in the world or in Sri Lanka, and they will not take, decide not to take such negative or punitive action. Maybe Sri Lanka will do other good things, which were not in the UN resolution. Maybe they'll do some other things which will win support from the rest of the world, who say, yes, this government has been genuine, has done things which previous governments have not been able to do. We should support it, even though it is not doing exactly what it promised to do.
Doctor, now that now you know that the government, present government, taking this decision in order to win the upcoming parliamentary election, like for the short-term benefit, they are that some say they are ignoring the long-term consequences that country might face. How do you see that?
Well, I'm sure that there will be a positive impact on their voter base, on the Sinhala majority voter will probably be in favor of what the government has done. So government will gain more political backing for what it has done. But as I said earlier, I don't think it is only that. This government and this government leadership right from the beginning has opposed the UN resolution. They have not been in favor of it. They have basically argued on the grounds of national sovereignty being impaired by this. So maybe there are other concerns also, such as the issue of accountability. They don't want to go through that process. So I think it is not simply to get votes of people, but because of their own conviction that this is not the path to follow.
Doctor, now the war ended 10 years ago. Now 10 years has passed. By this Sri Lankan government decision, what is in store for the victims, like victims' families from the northern east? Like, what can they expect? How can they proceed for their expectation of justice? How can they proceed with that?
I think that is the question that this government needs to answer. If they are not going according to the roadmap and according to the commitments made by the previous government and setting up the institutions that the resolution mandated, or not implementing it in that spirit, then they must show us what their alternative is. That is the challenge that they face. My surmise is that there will not be much progress in terms of setting up courts, new courts, special courts, especially not special courts which have international participation in the form of sitting judges who will take, foreign judges who will take decisions. It is still possible that this government might agree to international advisors. They have done that in the past also. There was this international eminent group of persons who came to support as observers the commission of inquiry into serious human rights violations. But that was not a happy experience, because the international observers clashed with the Sri Lankan Commission and with the, I think, the Attorney General's department, the lawyers there, and in the end they withdrew, very angrily they withdrew. So it was not a good experience. So maybe because of that the Sri Lankan government will totally reject international members coming in, either certainly as sitting judges, but also maybe even as observers. They probably will reject. So I don't think that there will be progress on setting up new courts with any sort of international participation. That I think is going to be the case. I think the best we can hope for is that some measure of justice will be done to the missing persons, the families, that the missing persons' families will be informed as to the status of their loved ones, that they should be given a final word about it. And the government must, I think there is still hope in some of those families that their missing persons are in government custody. I think the government must come out very firmly and categorically and honestly about whether they have any such persons in their custody. Maybe they should also find a mechanism by which the families of those missing persons are able to verify for themselves also, or can be in a position to accept that this is actually the true situation. If the government were to say we don't have any such person in our custody, I think that the government needs to do. And of course, the issue of compensation. There should be much more generous compensation than at present. At present, what the government has offered is 6,000 rupees a month, and I understand that it has been not given to more than a few hundred people. Only a few hundred victims, I think maybe like 200, have been actually given this money. And even that apparently, I believe, has stopped at the present time. So something much, much more generous should be offered. And in fact, something done so that the livelihood and future of those who lost their loved ones, their breadwinners, who supported them, should be designed by the government. I think that is the direction I think that is most feasible at this time. Also, then the Geneva Resolution also has many other things, such as changing the laws to make them more human rights compliant, coming up with a better political solution to ensure the rights of the ethnic minorities to govern themselves. Those also, I think, the government needs to take up.
Doctor, that now final question. Now that action by America to ban Shavendra Silva, is it all because of their willingness to have accountability in Sri Lanka, or to achieve their own agendas with regard to reducing the Chinese influence in Sri Lanka, gaining more power, more advantage in Sri Lanka? What is your take on this?
I would think probably it is a combination of these, but we should not also dismiss the human rights dimension of the ban that has been placed, because right from the time the war ended, there has been a great interest on the part of the international community, the Western countries, the United States included, to find out or to ensure that justice should take place for what happened, because they themselves were involved in those last minute negotiations. They were there at the end. I remember there was said to be a US plan to send their ships even and evacuate the LTT leadership. So the Americans are very heavily involved. The rest, then we also heard of telephone calls being made from the Wani to people like Eric Solheim and the international community, the ones the LTT had links with. So they were very involved in it. And I think, therefore, from that point itself, they have been interested in this issue. So I would not discount the human rights dimension about the way the LTT leadership was finally killed. But in addition, it could also be the case that the US government wants to put pressure on our government with regard to signing of these various agreements. But knowing the nature of international politics, I'm also a little doubtful that it is to put pressure on us to sign those documents, because our government is a nationalist government, and I think our leaders like to see themselves and are seen in this country as strong leaders who will not just wilt to pressure. So, if the US is thinking that by imposing this ban on Shavendra, that it will lead the government to cave in, maybe it might not be the most constructive thing. It might push Sri Lanka more into the Chinese in the direction of China. On the other hand, again, it is also it must be a little alarming to the government, because Shavendra Silva is right at the top of the hierarchy, and the next band could go even higher. So that also might also lead our government to want to engage more constructively with the US. So I think it's a combination of factors, and my hope is that the US and Sri Lanka don't escalate this conflict between them. It will be not good for us. Certainly, it may not be good in some sense for the US also, but they are the much more powerful actor. It is much more important for us, and I hope that this issue is resolved in a way that improves human rights protections for everyone, and also improves up the possibility that Sri Lanka can get economic assistance and economic investment to improve the lives of all its people.
Doctor, now 100 days have passed since the new president got elected. As a human rights activist at heart, during the past 100 days, the government has taken some steps. At the pinnacle of it, they are taking a step to withdraw from the UNHRC today. Are you worried about Sri Lanka?
There is apprehension. I mean, there is a certain concern among civil society leaders and civil society members about the increased surveillance that's taking place of our work. But of course, that is not new. There's always been a measure of surveillance. Yes, withdrawing from the resolution is a negative sign, which can be reversed, or which can be buffered, cushioned, if the government comes up with a roadmap and a viable alternative to what they are withdrawing from. I'm hopeful that such a roadmap will be forthcoming. At least we must work for that. We must work for that. We must encourage our government to do that. The international community also must encourage the government to do that. And also, so far, the 100 days have gone, and we are feeling apprehensive because of the surveillance, and because we also have a very negative memory of the past. But at the present time, there has been no, as I see it, no threats to us, no errors, no unlawful acts done against those who are doing their work for peace, for justice, for whatever. So at this time, I think it is still an open question as to how, in which direction we go, and we must try and do our best to ensure it goes in a good direction.